My name is Aiyoung Choi, and I was born in 1940 in Hamhung, which is now in North Korea. So at that time, my father was working for a very large Japanese company that was manufacturing metals and working on a variety of things that he, as a chemical engineer, was put to work on. And at one point, he was told that he was going to be sent to Sweden. He knew right away that it was probably not what it was explained to him as the project, but that he would be going abroad to learn about new methods of producing things for the Japanese war effort. And he did not want to do that under any circumstances. So basically, in the dead of night, he escaped. And it was a really, really cold time of the year, and everything was frozen. He went alone up to the north, crossed the Yalu River, over and across. It took him several days. Finally, he made it across to China and to Beijing, where he met some people he knew, and then he moved on further down to Shanghai. Then he called for my mother to come, bring the children and come down. At that time, I was 3. My older sister was 7, and my younger brother was just barely 1. And my mother, with the help of, I remember a young man who helped us move from the house with a small amount of luggage, and we somehow got on a train. It was very, very dark. I was throwing up all over the place, and my younger brother actually was sick. He had a bad cold, so my older sister was cradling my younger brother, baby brother, and my mother was just trying to take care of me. I remember being so sick, and then when I could sit up again, I would be leaning back, and the train was going through miles and miles of some countryside, and the telephone poles, they are really situated far apart, but they were like past me. I was just going like this. It seemed like an endless trip. When I was 5 years old was when World War II ended with Japan's surrender, 1945. And during the time that we were living there, my parents were very involved in the 임시정부, as well as the independence movement, and there were comings and goings in our house, in our apartment, but my mother and father especially were the kind of people, if I would ask, what are you doing, or what is going on, it would always be, like rubbing my head, oh, don't you worry about anything, you go and play. When we heard over shortwave radio, over the radio, that Japan had surrendered and its forces were pulling out, there was such incredible joy in our apartment. Lots of people came. I remember they were hugging each other and laughing and crying and just hugging and laughing and crying, Manse and all that. My mother, who was a musician, sat down at the piano and spontaneously wrote and then composed wrote the lyrics and composed the music to a song which is known as 해방의 노래, Song of Liberation. And it was sung by everyone in Shanghai immediately. My father would come home after a day or two away from home with groups of young men. Some of them were as young as 15 or 16, maybe even younger, 17, 18-year-old young men who had been conscripted by the Japanese, brought from Korea to work in the military camps that were spread out all over China. And what my father had been doing was, together with some of the other colleagues from the independence movement, would go out to the countryside and gather these young boys. what had happened was when the Japanese fled the camps, these young men were left all to themselves. And they couldn't speak the language. They didn't know what to do. There was nobody to guide them or protect them. And we don't even know how they survived until my father and his colleagues found them. So every few nights, he would be bringing home as many as 5, 6, 7 young men, very young men. I sometimes want to call them boys, but they were not soldiers. They had not been trained to become military, but they had been basically taking care of the Japanese soldiers in these camps, doing the cooking, the cleaning, and the whatever work they had to do. And many of them had not eaten for a long time. They were dirty, bedraggled, tired, exhausted. They would come into our apartment. Now, in preparation for all this, our mother had kind of rearranged the furniture in the living room so that there would be more space for people. And she had told my sister, my younger brother, and me to stay in the back rooms and don't come out until, unless you are called for. So the three of us would be watching everything happening in the living room through the keyhole. And we'd be like fighting it's my turn, looking, and we'd be, wow, astounded at these young, dirty, bedraggled boys, young men, walking in. And then the next thing we know is our mother had filled up the bathtub. We had only one bathroom, a bathtub with some yellow kind of a liquid chemical to rid them of the bugs. And she shaved everyone's head to get rid of the lice. And so the bathroom was one heck of a mess. But each person was bathed, when then they were given a set of not new, but clean clothes that had been collected from among the Koreans who were there. And they were then given a big bowl of juk with some kimchi or some kind of banchan, there was a big pot of juk, being several pots, but always something cooking on the stove. So they would just eat this like they hadn't eaten anything good for such a long time. Finish it up, and then the next thing we know is they just give their bowls up and then just lie there, and then they fall asleep, right? And so we were watching this whole thing going on. It was day after day after day. Meanwhile, my father would have taken down the names, ages, hometowns, names of parents of each of these young men who was found. And every day he had, I don't think it was every day exactly, but I think it's several times a week, he was able to get half an hour or so through the Voice of America to be on the radio, where he would announce the names of each person over the radio, which could be heard back in Korea by their families who had not until that moment known whether their son had lived, had survived, or was dead. The ending of each broadcast would say, so these young men will be boarding the name of the ship, departing Shanghai, the date and time, arriving in Busan or I think it's Incheon, one of those big ports, and the date of arrival and time of arrival. So these boys men were being shipped back to Korea on their way home. But before they went home, what had been happening in our apartment also was the making of a lot of little Korean flags, What I remember is tons of white fabric, rolls, tons of white fabric, black, blue, and red, and while 2 or 3 women would be cutting them, there would be 2 or 3 others at the sewing machines, and the sound of the sewing machine going day and night, the old-fashioned sewing machine, Singer sewing machine. And as each flag was made, someone would put it around a stick and then lay it to the side. So there was a pile of little flags. And on the day that these young men were going home, each one was given one of these flags. And 2 or 3 times I was allowed to go, my sister, brother, and I, 3 of us were allowed to go to the dock to see the big, huge steamship take off. And again, my memory is of them each being given a flag and walking up the gangplank into the ship and then just lining the deck and just waving the flags down at the people down below who had come to see them off. And then as the horn tooted and the ships kind of moved away, the flags were waving faster and faster and then sailing into the ocean.